Are you ready for a great Democratic victory?
We need to work this out.
We need people to help us.
And we will see you out there down the road.
This is the What and the Why podcast for the week ending the 9th of November, 2018.
Hello, welcome to the What and the Why podcast, the latest version, or the second version as we call it. With me, Tim Marshall, and
David Waywell.
Deputy Editor David Waywell. We're going to be talking about the midterms, US midterm election results, what they mean, looking ahead. Latin America gets a mention because of the election of Bolsonaro in Brazil, but just a sort of wider politics, because nobody ever talks about Latin America. And then it's Word of the Year. David, you were that bloke who stayed up all night watching the midterm results come in. What did you make of it?
Pretty much as expected, I think. I said last week, I think they would take the House of Representatives, and I didn't think they stood a chance of the Senate. But having said that, the last few days, I did follow the media's kind of faith that the Democrats were getting a little bit of momentum, and I was beginning to suspect that maybe it would have been a little bit more of a wave. It wasn't. It was a small splash, and I think
the blue wave was sort of a blue puddle.
Stream.
Can you call it a stream?
Yeah, well, yeah. I just call it a splash. I mean, they did well, but they didn't do great. The Republicans did poorly, but it wasn't terrible. Trump's already boasting of a great victory. It's not a great victory.
No, but nor is it a great defeat. And in fact, we really are set up for the next presidential election, which sort of begins today. For the record, at time of recording, the Republicans did hold on to the Senate. In fact, they increased the number of seats by 2. The House of Representatives switched from being Republican majority to Democrat majority, 219 seats to 193. There was a lot more seats up for grabs there, and they grabbed about 26 of them. And so what does it mean? For the Senate, it means that President Trump can continue to install into positions of influence and power his choices. And for the House, David?
Well, I think it means that they're going to have a hell of a lot of oversight which they haven't had in the last 2 years. I mean, Trump's really had a very, very he's had a honeymoon period because nobody could touch him. He could basically block all investigations. He's had Devin Nunes basically feeding propaganda straight into the media as though it was like intelligence reports. I think it's all going to change. Whether it's going to help the Democrats, that's a different issue. There's a chance it could backfire. It could start to make Trump look like a victim. It's going to get very interesting.
I think it's going to get very unpleasant as well. There was quite a lot of talk this morning from both candidates and American media that, right, let's try and put this awful, terrible vitriol behind us and get back to politics. But they will not be able to help themselves going after Trump. And you can make the case that there are things to be investigated. And there's no way in hell that Mr. Trump is going to reach out particularly far into the center ground. He's already tweeted today in response to the idea that the Democrats are going to go after him on his tax returns, potential collusion with Russia, etc. He's tweeted, well, 2 can play that game, meaning if they do that, he will go after certain Democratic candidates or former candidates such as Hillary Clinton for collusion and various misdemeanors as well. So I don't think it's going to get any more pleasant.
No, and I think one of the advantages of actually staying up watching it through the night was you noticed that I think it was about 3:00 when the House was called. I think it was NBC called the House. There was an immediate feedback from somebody inside the Democratic Party who said, right, this is it, we're going to go after Trump's tax returns. And you can tell there's not going to be any compromise, but I don't think either party have got reason to compromise. I mean, the Democrats now have a way of inflicting harm on Trump, and Trump isn't going to compromise because even though he's the so-called great deal maker, he's not shown any signs of it in the past. He's not going. His base aren't going to accept it. When the Democrats offered a compromise on the Dreamers earlier in the year, and there was that crazy cabinet meeting where he invited the press in, and he was looking cordial, and he was saying, "Yes, I'm going to sign whatever you hand over." And then within 24 hours, the right wingers had got to him, and it was all off the table again.
And speaking of the right wingers, there's more of them than ever. The Republican Party is more Trumpian than it was before, because some of the Republican critics of him, sort of moderates, Bob Corker, Jeff Flake, they were in the Senate. They're standing down, and there are more people that will be encouraging him. And again,
I was going to say Mitt Romney's come back in, so it balances out a little bit. It depends what role you think Mitt Romney's going to play.
The name Mitt Romney reminds me of another potential issue. Will anyone stand against President Trump from the Republican Party in 2 years' time?
Yeah. This is where I think I could be naive and I could be too idealistic and optimistic. I've always thought that the Trumpism would burn itself out. I always think it would eat itself, and I think that a moderate republicanism is still there. The Bush family have been. I mean, I know George H.W. Bush is getting on now, and is not, the figure he was. But I just think the Bushes, all the old Republicans, had just been too quiet for too long.
Yeah. So when I said I don't think they will, what I meant was I don't think anybody would win. Because knowing this would come up, I had to look back through the record. 1968, Robert Kennedy stood against Johnson in the Democrats. Eventually, because he was then assassinated, and Vice President Humphrey then lost to Nixon. 1976, Reagan opposed Ford. Ford lost to Carter. Go on, 1980, Edward Kennedy opposed Carter, lost. Carter was defeated by Reagan. And the last one, 1992, Pat Buchanan opposed George H.W. Bush's renomination. Bush won and then lost to Clinton. So the pattern there is, if you try to challenge the incumbent president from your own party, you lose, and then also that they then lose.
Do you think Trump stands, though?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, for the last 2 years, people have been saying he's got about a week left. The past 2 years said he's getting impeached next week. For the past 2 years, he only did it as a joke. Yeah. I don't buy any of that. As far as I'm concerned, he'll be, as things stand, he's standing. Well,
my take on it is I actually agree with all those people. I think he did it as a joke. I think he did it to enable himself to establish a new news channel or whatever under his name. But I also think he's locked in it now. I don't think he can escape it because he has too much protection as the president.
And too big an ego. You can't admit defeat.
Yeah, I think that's 90% of understanding Trump's politics is understanding his ego and his character and his father fixation and his psychology. I don't think there's actually that much politics which come into it, to be honest.
You may be right. Yes, I'm not sure there's an overarching
ideological
core ideology of a fiction politician. Going back to the broad brush strokes, this was a record number of female members of Congress are in. The first two Muslim women are in. Both came out of Minnesota and Michigan, both of which have sizable Muslim populations, and at least one, possibly two Native American women, lots of younger members. So Congress now does better represent the 2018 US population. I think all of those were on the Democrat side. So I don't think there's a new inclusivity arriving in Congress.
My problem with that, it's not so much of a problem because I think inclusion and representation is great, is how the Democrats treat that, because there is a danger with the Democrats. I mean, this is a demographic battle in America, what's happening in the politics, and it's how the Democrats particularly play that demographic battle. If they over-present themselves as the champions of these various, identity groups, then they're going to completely lose central rural America. And I just think that's a very, very difficult balance that they have to strike. So I think it's great that all these women have come into Congress. But my worry would be the media already make a hell of a lot out of it. Does that just antagonise those people in Trump's base and those moderates who would possibly go Democratic but think, well, maybe they were a little bit too representative, if you understand what I mean? Sorry.
There remain some floating voters and independent voters who wouldn't automatically go for either party. And if the Democrats do go too much for identity politics, they'll turn off that particular potential centre party vote. And also the Democrats still are struggling to connect with blue collar white voters, of which there remain very many. They got absolutely hammered in some of the rural states. And they got hammered in some of the majority blue-collar white areas. And where they were stronger was in the suburbs, Virginia, Pennsylvania suburbs, not inner Pennsylvania. And they still have this problem with connecting with a sizable proportion.
I think this is why Biden is probably the pick. If they could pick somebody, I think it would have to be somebody like Biden who can connect to that blue collar. Places like Pittsburgh. I don't think. I mean, the name I hear all the time is Elizabeth Warren, but I just think that is a guaranteed. Trump
Biden is a figure from the past, although he may be present and who knows future. Hillary's clearly of the past. Biden is about the only person of that generation, I think, that could generate enough enthusiasm. I mean, there's some names now appearing. Now they may fall at the first hurdle. There'll be people we've never heard of. I mean, we'd never heard of Obama until only a couple of years before he broke through. There's a guy called Beto O'Rourke in Texas, Democrat. Now he lost. Was he the guy that lost to Ted Cruz?
Yeah, he lost to Ted Cruz, and he also said yesterday that he was not going to stand in 2020. But I
thought he said if he lost. No, sorry. I thought he said if he won, he wouldn't be standing down midterm to campaign to become president. But as he's lost, he's now free to do that.
I would take. I think he's also one of the best chances because they need somebody like that. They need a figure who can galvanise the support, and it needs the charisma because the Democrats are severely lacking in charisma at the moment.
Yeah, and slightly younger as well.
Slightly younger. Biden's a little bit older, but Biden has got that kind of charisma. Whether he makes too many gaffes, that's another issue.
Oh, gaffes, schmaffs. How many gaffes Trump made?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's my theory. I think that's why people like Trump, because there is an element of the completely roguish, he's not the professional politician. He's the political version of a podcast. He's rambling, random, chaotic, full of
rambling.
Yeah, but that's what I think. That's what people like.
Fantastically focused, and in fact, I'm going to prove it now.
Go on.
Because you won't even see the gear change, nor be able to tell that in fact I planned this.
I'll have it written down.
Do you? Not in the least. Do you know why the Democrat symbol is a donkey?
I don't know. No.
Well, I'm glad you asked.
Go on.
Oh,
sorry. Why is the Democrat symbol a donkey?
Oh, thank you for. I'm glad you asked me that.
In fact, in a minute, I'll ask you about the elephant as well. I think.
1828, candidate Andrew Jackson for presidency was called a jackass, and this sort of stuck. So he turned it around. He used the symbol to suggest that he was strong-willed, and he said, "Look, if I'm a jackass, this, that, and the other." And there was a cartoonist. Quite a few years later, you're a big fan of cartoonists, I know, and he picked it up and depicted Jackson as a jackass, and it stuck so much that because he was a Democrat and he became president, the Democrat symbol became a donkey.
Okay, and the GOP, why is that an elephant?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me that, David. 1874, the cartoonist Thomas Nast.
Oh yeah, Nast's great.
Yeah, as a cartoonist, you'd be very familiar with him. He did a political cartoon, and there was lots of zoo animals, and each one with a sort of political symbolism. And the elephant was labelled the Republican Party. And again, that cartoon seemed to resonate so much, and the idea of it stuck. And then, sort of organically, the elephant became the Republican Party. So things you didn't know. There's more.
I was going to ask you, did you maybe know why they're represented by red and blue? As though we didn't prepare this earlier, he says, knowingly.
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, David. Actually, I don't have this written down. I'm going to go from memory.
I think I know it. I think I know. I don't know the guy's name, but it's quite recent, isn't it? Like the last 10 years.
Well, Well, it's about 20 years.
Oh, is
but
it 20
goes back
years?
to the 70s. But carry on. Let's see how much you know.
It's an arbitrary choice, isn't it, by a TV pundit who just happened to colour his map in red and blue. And
it goes back. They didn't really have the red for left and the blue for right that much of the rest of the world has, partially because of the red flag of the Soviets and the growth of modern political parties. So they didn't really have that in the States much. And then in colour television, I think it was NBC, mid-70s, they suddenly had, mass viewing of colour television and big election nights. And they coloured in the map one way and they coloured it in another way. And everyone thought, this is a great idea. And all the networks copied it, but they didn't all copy the same colours. So you'd switch over and some states would be red for Democrat. And you switch over to another channel, there'd be red for Republicans. So eventually they kind of settled, and then about 20 years ago, it just became accepted norm for the blue, which of course in our political lexicon would be right of centre, became the Democrats and the other way round. And of course, Americans shorten everything. And so instead of saying a Republican state, you would just say a red state. And here we are now, and that explains it. And also, because this isn't in any way structured or scripted, that leads us nicely on to the pink tide in Latin America.
I was going to say purple states as well, but I also had one question for you to prove it's unscripted.
Hang on, is this one that I prepared earlier?
No, it isn't.
Go on.
Okay. Do you think the colours matter? As in, it's always occurred to me, and I don't know whether I have a theory. It's something I've never explored. It's just one of those things that lodges in your brain. But I often wonder whether the colour of a party that chooses to represent itself actually has a slight effect on the success of the party.
Yes, I think it does. Because, and as you know, I wrote a book about flags. It wasn't really about flags. It was about identity and nationalism.
Yeah.
And from memory, it was a couple of years ago, I think I argued in that like a painting, it is what you bring to it as well as what it says to you. And so if you now identify with that colour as if it represents your thoughts and ambitions and deep beliefs, and the red flag is a great example. We'll keep the red flag flying high. If you are of that bent and you see that in battle or raised above the Reichstag or whatever it is, it will mean more to you and will generate emotion in you than if you're not intellectually inclined towards that. So it's not the actual colour that matters. It's what you imbibe it with. It's the meaning you imbibe it with. And once you have imbibed, or once that colour of that party means X, then yes, it does matter.
Yeah, it's like there's a theory of it's got structuralism where we're informed by the deep structures of our minds and our kind of natures. For example, that's why bad guys are always wear black, is because we associate dark caves and the night with things that we fear. And I've wondered whether the Labour Party is hindered by the red colour. Because actually, it's like, as soon as they have a huge red backdrop, whether it becomes a kind of aggressive colour, it's a colour of radical change, whereas the Conservatives are kind of blessed by the blue, which is a colour of passivity and...
This isn't really where I wanted to go with this, but Norwich City have painted the away dressing room pink on the grounds that it is a sort of soft colour and will encourage the opposition to be softer, which leads me nicely...
Oh, I know you want to get back to pink, but I find this a fascinating subject. But
Which leads me nicely to the pink tide in Latin America.
I'm trying to avoid talking about Latin America, you can tell, but I want to know more about Norwich City. But go on, carry
on. The pink tide, in case anyone doesn't know, was this phrase around about early 2000s, mid 2000s. And you looked at a map of South America, and you saw that veering socialism more towards the left were Venezuela, Ecuador, Paraguay, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil. That's like 3/4 of the South American population. And it was called the pink tide. Well, one by one, they've fallen. Uruguay is about the only liberal centrist government. And it's just Venezuela, Ecuador, and Bolivia that remain on the left of centre. So you look at the map now, And in classical colour terms, there's those three, which are pink or red if you prefer for the left, and the rest of the map is looking pretty blue. So now there's this new phrase called the blue tide. And the reason I wanted to talk about it briefly is because Jair Bolsonaro is the incoming president of Brazil, elected last week, takes office on January the 1st. And I just think he fits into this era of the strongman we are in.
That's what I actually wanted to. That's one of the things that it strikes me now. Do you think South America's got a kind of predilection for strongmen, or is it just the whole world is at the moment? I know we have like a few in the Far East, and there's Putin, but South America I always seem to associate with like the dictators.
It's a global thing that's happening. I mean, for Duterte in the Philippines, Modi in India, Xi in China, Trump in the States, Orban in Hungary, and there are others. And now adding to that is this guy Bolsonaro, son of an army officer, condemned for racist, misogynistic, homophobic remarks, plays the religion card whenever he can, and came to power partially on promising to really crack down on crime. I mean, Duterte has got the police death squads out. I think this will maybe a pattern. Sorry, but as for being classically South American, no, they had a poor start in South America. Their structures didn't grow up properly. If you look at the maps, it's called the Hollow Continent. The colonialists arrived, went up the rivers as far as they could, and then stopped. And the trading posts became the big cities. But they simply stole what they could. Mostly the Spanish were doing this, and Portuguese, and went straight back down the river to the sea to get the stuff back to the old country. So what they didn't do was develop these areas and then link these large cities to each other inland. And so to this day, they are held back structurally and economically. Also, the Americans, of course, having, let's face it, appropriated, or to use another word, stolen the land of the United States, then parceled it out to people, and they became a landowning people, which is far more democratic. That never really happened. It was still sort of feudalism. So they've always been held back, and therefore their politics has lagged behind in the democratic development. They've made great strides just in the last 30 years to come out of that era of dictatorship. And Bolsonaro is not a dictator. He has been elected. So have all of them in the Latin American political sphere. Maduro's Venezuela is, I wouldn't say the most open vote that's going on. So I don't think it is necessarily part and parcel of Latin American culture now to have the dictator, but the strong leader at times like now, when things are very, very sticky, and when there's this global movement of anxiety about globalism and mass movement of peoples. Sorry, I will get to the end of this sentence, David, somehow. I think is what has led to Bolsonaro being a sort of figure in that ilk. There you go.
No, it's just the... I read the piece that you wrote for the site, which is now on the site. Good plug for the site. Where you were suggesting that he was Bolsonaro was a response or in his sort of challenge to Venezuela. You know, the view of but I mean, when you think of Venezuela, you think of Chavez. I was reading a piece by Hitchens where he was talking about the madness of Chavez. Digging up the body of Simon Bolivar. And sort of putting his crest on the
whole Bolivarian revolution, which of course it belongs to that sort of 60s, 70s revolutionary fervor, and I understand. But the difference between Maduro in Venezuela now and Chavez is that Chavez had lots and lots of money.
Yeah, it was $100
from the oil price.
Yeah, $100 a barrel. Yeah,
exactly, and it's just nosedived, and of course they didn't do anything for the country other than spend the oil money. There's no structure there. So to try to pin it together with Bolsonaro. So the left-wing governments began to fall one after the other. The corruption was immense. Lula in Brazil is currently serving a 12-year sentence for accepting bribes. Kirchner, you might remember, in Argentina, She's been indicted recently, and I think that Bolsonaro is more a response to that sort of completely being fed up with the hypocrisy of the leaders from left and right. Unemployment, perhaps more than anything, the level of violent crime. I think it's one of the world leaders, Brazil.
Yeah,
and so along comes this relatively charismatic figure who was stabbed in the stomach during the election campaign, which, let's face it, if you survive, never does you any real harm electorally, being stabbed. No, what a hero.
Yeah, I think it's been the plot of a few books, that, I'm sure.
Indeed. So, and he rides this to power, and so now he's going to be one of these big, strong leaders. He is going to grow the police forces. He's going to let them. They weren't really on a leash, but he's going to cry Harry and release the dogs of war, and it's going to be pretty tough. It's going to be, and if he succeeds, then of course his neighbours look at this strong man and this right of centre and think, yeah, there's something in that. I'll go for that. And of course the electorate did say, yeah, we like what we're hearing. And
well, it's a Catholic country, and he offers a sort of a form of stability, I suppose, something they kind of recognise.
Yeah, this was the I think underreported thing that happened in the Brazilian election, and that is the role of religion. You do have the Catholic Church, which apart from revolutionary theology, which is a connected thing that goes back to the 60s and 70s, the Catholic Church can be quite conservative. So you've got a relatively conservative power base with its own electorate that will go towards the right of centre. But then what's happened in Brazil is that about 30% of the population now identify as evangelical Protestant. They've actually switched. They're not like there's been a greater birth rate amongst the minority Protestant population. There have been people who've switched colours in that respect. And they're overwhelmingly, these evangelicals, just as they do in the United States, are right of centre, and overwhelmingly they voted for this guy who plays the God card whenever he can. Most Latin American leaders play the God card. Morales in Bolivia, who I once met, Evo Morales, he said, "Oh, Jesus was the world's first socialist." So they play these cards. Lula, that I mentioned, currently has a crucifix clutched to him at all times, praying for forgiveness and that he's been wrongly done by, etc., etc. So again, he fits into that classic religious model.
Well, I was going to say it's an easy card to play. Even Trump plays it. Doesn't play.
Well, yeah. I mean, to a lesser extent, all American politicians do. I mean, have you ever heard an American politician say, "Oh my God"?
No. Or an American politician or a president admit that they're an atheist, but quite a few of them were. I mean, Lincoln most obviously was a deist at the very.
I didn't know that.
Worst.
Really?
Yeah. I think. I mean, later on in his life, I've just finished reading a biography of him. He did sort of read the Bible, but I think he read it more as a kind of literary source for his own speeches. But I think it was like when his children died that he kind of looked for meaning more. But he was a deep rationalist. Of
course, the Constitution itself says one nation under God.
Well, that's it. America is founded as a nation of reason. That's why it is what it is. But it's strange how reason is often forgotten, and it's everybody plays the God card. I mean,
reason. There's a good word. See what I did there?
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
I didn't, but in retrospect, I did spot what you did.
Collins Dictionary has come out with its words of the year. One of which is gammon.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this word?
I am familiar with it. I've never used it.
No, I don't like it, but go on.
It doesn't bother me. I think we should be allowed our insults. I don't think you should start trying to censor what people say.
Oh no, I don't. I wouldn't censor it. I just don't like it.
It's pretty apt. It's pretty.
It is apparent, according to Collins, generally deployed to describe white men of a certain age who become pink in the face when working themselves into a rage about the European Union. And you can see the humour factor.
Yeah.
In that. But I just think that the term, as I see it on social media, has been pretty much used for any white man with whom someone doesn't agree is called a gammon.
Yeah, but the same can be said of the word fascist. There's a silly piece by Brendan
fascist.
O'Neill I read the other day saying that, fascists should be restricted to very certain uses of states where the army's come in and taken over the political system.
Yeah, that's lost, though. It's a bit like decimate. The battle is over. It no longer means 1 in 10. It means smashed.
Yeah, exactly.
Fascist. It no longer is a particular term about a set of ideals and the structure of a state, and which is, of course, is different to Nazism. It's just a generic now.
It is, yeah. That was Orwell's argument in the piece that O'Neill was quoting, and he misquoted it. He didn't seem to want to pick up on the fact that Orwell said it is a word which means these things, and we just use it carefully and don't overuse it, so it retains its power. And I think that's true. And I think even to a certain sense that's true of gammon. I mean, it doesn't bother me.
Well, it doesn't bother me. It's just a bit tedious.
Well, it is.
It totally bothers me, actually, now I think of it. Listen, I did a bit of research, and apparently the term was first used as an insult in 1838 by Charles Dickens in Nicholas Nickleby to describe a pompous MP named Mr. Gregsbury. And Mr. Gregsbury says in Nicholas Nickleby, "The meaning of that term gammon is unknown to me. If it means that I grow a little too fervid or perhaps hyperbolic in extolling my native land, I admit the full justice of my remark," says the character, as he then goes on about how wonderful the UK is. Finishing up, David, other words, #MeToo have made it. Gaslight has made it. But their word of the year is not plogging. Plogging is a Swedish activity that combines jogging.
Sorry, a Swedish.
Sorry.
I thought it was going to be much filthier than that when you said it was a Swedish activity.
A Swedish activity. You can do this in the sauna if you've got a large one, but it combines litter picking whilst running.
Sorry, my mind's gone.
Flocker, Swedish for to pick. Anyway, we'll end with single use. That's the word of the year, apparently, which you're fully across, yeah?
Oh, God, yeah, of course. I've no idea what it means. I was thinking Ramona was going to be in there. It's another word I don't like, but it doesn't bother me.
Brexiteer, although maybe that was 2017 as well. Single use, simply the reference to plastics. Single-use bags, single-use straws, etc., etc. Listen, that's a positive thing, that the fact of it is now an everyday word, except for you. That has increased awareness, and
as in, would it be so? It's single use, like as in single use sauna, where you wouldn't go back in it if you finish plugging or whatever the word was.
No, it's about straws.
Straws, oh yeah, the band now, aren't they?
Touching at those,
okay.
We shall end. Thank you very much. That was the latest in a long series of 2. If you want to hear a third, do let us know.
Oh yeah, the email address.
Yeah.
twtwpodcast@gmail.com. Any advice, tips, or questions? Perhaps people can ask you questions and I can sit here and pose them as though I've come up with them.
TWTW, that's just struck me as a man of a certain age, the week that was.
Yeah, the week that was, yeah.
But this is the what and the why. Thank you for listening.
The end is in sight.
The colourful phrase used by a charismatic figure.
This is the Trump shutdown.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the nations of the world.